Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 12th of May 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish, with me in the studio, Mike Robinson. We are joined by live video Skype link by David Scott with Northern Exposure, of course, reporting, amongst other things, on matters north of the border. It's cold and grey here in Plymouth. I don't know what's happened to the spring or summer sunshine, but it's temporarily disappeared.
Well, let's go straight to Scotland then, David. And the Herald here suggesting that a bill could criminalise mothers who block contact. Let's hear it.
This is a very troubling situation, and it's come from the kind of follow on from some really poorly thought out legislative proposals. The sort of things we're talking about criminalising here are putting some sort of listening or tracking or camera device in a toy to monitor a child when one parent's remote, presumably to gain evidence on the other parent's inappropriate behaviour. So that's to be criminalised. That seems a strange choice. And they're also talking about criminalising controlling behaviour. And this has no definition. So it falls down to almost any sort of behaviour which could be painted as unwanted by one party is to be criminalised. And it comes from an extension of domestic violence legislation to cover non-violent conduct. So if you are dominating, if one partner is dominating another psychologically, that's to be handled via domestic violence legislation. And the people who then put this idea forward or advocated it are now saying, well, this latest proposal, which has come from a father's organisation, Families Need Fathers, I think it's called. This is going too far. This is taking the concept of coercive behaviour as domestic violence and applying it where it shouldn't be. But of course, the difficulty here is there are no definitions for any of these things. It's all extremely subjective, and it criminalises normal behaviour and introduces the state, which is failing to prevent fraud, murder, child rape, and indeed covering up all of the above into families so that they can police families as well.
And take more children, perhaps?
That's likely to be one of the end points, yes. As the state's grip on family life becomes ever more firm and the parents disappear more into the background, then it's going to be more and more children will be taken by the state as parents fail to meet these specified obligations or as other actions within the state require children to be taken.
And is smacking to become a form of domestic violence?
Well, according to the Green Party in Scotland, it should be. So this is now also criminalising normal parenting, criminalising happy families, and putting the state here crucially between the child and its parent. So, you're a child, you get told off, you didn't like the way it went down, phone the police, involve the state in your family life, because the child's not going to realise the horrible implications that has for the child itself, for the whole wider family, when it's feeling, when its feelings are hurt, and it's dealing with things in an immature way because it's an immature human being.
So is this because the named person scheme has more or less failed? Is this an attempt by the Scottish government to find other ways to sidle their way into family lives?
I don't know if it's exactly cause and effect because of the resistance to named person, but it's certainly coming from the same stable of ideas where the family is seen as dangerous and toxic, and the state is seen as all good, all knowing, and the saviour of the innocent.
Yeah. Okay. Well, tell us about gender then.
This is a gender unicorn. I was quite surprised by this. This is coming from a gender fluid and transgender activist group in America who are now operating in the field of educational resource. That's what the ER in the title stands for. And the gender unicorn is a concept and is a colouring book and is a lesson being given to school children, and they're asked to plot their own gender identity in these various ways. So you see, you can have, you can be a certain proportion male, female, other. Not quite sure what other is, but other. And then how that expresses itself. Gender expression is largely how you dress. So we're one step away from the fashion police here. So you can state how you express your gender via your clothing on that scale, who you're physically attracted to and who you're emotionally attracted to. So I think that's what used to be called friendship, but there we go. And what this will, of course, do is promote confusion in children.
David, is sex assigned at birth?
Apparently so. It's not. Well, you see, this is it. It's not real. Right? The fallacy, the nonsense that they're trying to get across is that your gender is a social construct. It's fluid. It's whatever you want it to be. That there's no underlying scientific basis to say whether you're male or female, which is, of course, garbage. And this has been taught to our children. It's worrying. It's completely nonsensical. It's going to be exploited for a whole lot of ill, I suspect, because on one level it's confusion. On another level, it could easily be termed child abuse, because what are you doing here? Who's grooming people? Who's introducing ideas into children that will blight their lives? There is a requirement for people to be a bit more responsible, I would have thought.
David, if I'm just coming on this one, I'll just say from my personal opinion, I'll push most strongly that these agendas are certainly not nonsense. The agenda is calculated, it's constructed in order to do a job, which is to attack the minds of young children, and it's certainly there to help break down traditional heterosexual families. This is very, very sinister applied behavioural psychology in order to destroy. This is not there to help create happy, loving family environments and people who are comfortable with their gender as they were born. But I take your point, Mike. We're saying that from conception, the gender is formed. But this is a calculated political agenda that is being created. The resources are being created through organisations like this particular one. And of course, if you go into it that little bit further, somebody is funding this stuff. So the nonsense bit, yes, many of us regard it as nonsense, but the reality is this is a calculated political agenda designed to break down society as we know it. It's very dangerous.
Would you like to hear their mission? TSER's mission. Trans Student Educational Resources is a youth-led organisation dedicated to transforming the educational environment for trans and gender non-conforming students through advocacy and empowerment. In addition to a focus on creating a more trans-friendly educational system, our mission is to educate the public and teach trans activists how to be effective organisers. We believe that justice for trans and gender non-conforming youth is contingent on an intersectional framework of activism. Ending oppression is a long-term process that can only be achieved through collaborative action.
Yeah, is this Soros? Is this Soros funded? I mean, that language to me is open society. This is change agent material.
It is. It's change agent, and it's also saying that there is no end. It's a long-term process, so it never ends. There is never any end to differences, to human differences, and when there's differences, there's some form of oppression going on, and we must get in there and we must fight that oppression and break down society until the oppression goes. But the oppression never goes, so it's a never-ending attack on society. It's extremely nihilistic when you get right down to it, and it's using strange words, but basically that means we're going to be attacking everything and everybody forever.
Okay, well, let's move back to Scotland and education, and that's a pretty unpleasant image of Nippy there.
Well, yes. increasingly, that's what we're getting. You're failing our children. The illiteracy levels in Scotland have doubled very, very rapidly. The school attainment levels in numeracy and literacy are plummeting, and Scotland is plummeting down the educational scale on an international level.
That's a pretty impressive thing to have happened, because of course Scotland and Northern Ireland had traditionally better education systems than the rest of the UK.
This is true, but it's no. This was true. It is no longer true.
Yeah.
The degree of decline, the steepness of a decline, is really quite striking. So you're not talking about a generational change. You're not talking about having a completely new a group of teachers coming through, educated in a different way, and the process slowly changing. It's much more rapid than that. So you're talking about things which have changed in the organisation of the existing resources. So this is things called curriculum for excellence. You could always tell a government programme what it's actually going to do is by simply reversing the words, so you get more accuracy that way. And GERFEC, getting it right for every child. When the minister responsible, John Swinney, was standing in the Scottish Parliament this week, trying to explain why the levels of illiteracy in Scotland had doubled, he was saying that we are going to remove bureaucracy. This is the bureaucracy that the government applied and forced into the schools. We're going to remove it so that we can concentrate on reading, on literacy, on numeracy, and on health and well-being. So those were the three things: literacy, numeracy, health and well-being. Do you notice anything strange about that little grouping, Mike?
Tell me.
Well, literacy and numeracy, we all got when we were at school. Health and well-being is up there with the other two, in that the number of objectives that schools have to satisfy in health and well-being is more numerous than the numeracy requirements. This is a huge area of educational teaching of the objectives of the schooling now. It's not been focused on numeracy and literacy. It's been focused on health and well-being. Now, health and well-being sounds quite benign, but it's not, because health and well-being is GERFEC, which is happiness, which is how you think and how you behave. It's reframing how you act. It's essentially doing the parents' job for them, or seeking to. It's changing how people think. You then get into sex ed, death ed, and all of these things, and that reframes how people approach these parts of life. It's to change society. So the three things we're trying to do is numeracy, literacy, and change society. And because one of those things is actually harmful and taking up a lot of time, even if not harmful, the other two are not surprisingly suffering.
Okay, let's move on to Islington. This is the Islington Gazette, and the headline is Islington Kids Home Scandal. Shame of ex-mayor Sandy Mark's pro-paedophile past. Islington's a real hotspot for some pretty nasty behaviour.
It certainly is. And this lady's was a councillor and was responsible for some of the homes which were being used, let's face it, as child brothels. I mean, the level of abuse that was happening in Islington seems to have been, absolutely off the scale. And it transpires that while she was doing this job, she was also working with pro-paedophile organisations who were trying to have the age of consent removed as a concept. And we're trying to decriminalise all of the paedophile behaviour, and we're supporting such organisations as the Paedophile Information Exchange. She also had direct contact with Tom O'Carroll of the Paedophile Information Exchange, and has then subsequently changed her story about this quite a few times. And when confronted with evidence, she first of all expressed how remorseful she was and how she was stupid and young and she was taken in, And then she said that none of this information was true and she was entirely innocent. So I think this lady's got some serious questions to answer.
And not just her, because of course quite a number of senior members of the Labour Party are from that part of London, have held seats or have been active politically in that part of London. They also have questions to answer.
They do, and exactly the same questions. Harriet Harman, for one, was in Liberty when they were supporting the paedophile information exchange. And we see that this has been part of the left-wing view of liberalism, a word which has changed its meaning a lot over the years. The left-wing view of freedom from bourgeois rules, and the left-wing view that the family has to be destroyed in order to bring about the new society which must be. So we certainly had during the 70s, 80s, 90s. And for all I know, it's still going on, but it's less clear now. It's at least been opened up to some public scrutiny. A very nasty extreme left-wing affiliation with such things as paedophilia.
Okay, well, staying on that subject, this is an update on Melanie Shaw, but I thought for any of our viewers or listeners who weren't fully aware of Melanie's case, Melanie was the whistleblower on abuse of children at Beechwood Children's Home in Nottingham, and from the time that she blew the whistle to the police, she has suffered harassment, victimisation, ultimately been put in prison. And just with two photographs, what is the difference between the lady coping with her life following abuse on screen at the moment, and what Melanie looked like when she came out of HM Prison Peterborough, having been looked after by Sodexo Prison Services. And in fact, that was the better of several photographs I took. She was in a very, very bad state. Now, let's remember that she was put in prison by Theresa May, former Home Secretary. I just couldn't resist this BBC headline that Theresa May on the BBC, not talking about protecting children from abuse, but discussing who puts the bins out and love, whatever that was. So this is the state of Theresa May's Conservative Britain, covering up the abuse of children and putting the whistleblowers in prison. Now, these were some of the texts that Melanie was sending me back in 2016. So when we're actually, I tweeted these out, but following the text that came into me, she was saying that she was being harassed and threatened by the police. And of course, this was because Melanie had at that stage proved that Nottinghamshire police were lying in saying that they were carrying out Operation Daybreak because, amongst other things, they were claiming to have interviewed people who were already dead. But the tables turned on Melanie and she was put under huge pressure. Now, thanks to all of the efforts of viewers and supporters of the UK column, we know that pressure has gone through to Theresa May and Amber Rudd. Melanie was recently moved prison from Foston Hall to Newhall Prison, and Melanie was able to call a member of the public a couple of days ago, and Melanie has said that her treatment in Newhall is much, much better than Foston Hall. She is still on a special wing, but she's able to mix with other prisoners. She's got much better treatment. She's able to take part in activities, so this gives us some release, and she can mix with the other prisoners. So this can only have taken place with the support of viewers and listeners. Melanie says, please thank everybody who stayed supporting me, and she particularly wants to thank people who've made money donations, because this is what she totally relies on now in prison. And I believe that one donation that's come in over the last couple of days, really quite generous. So Melanie is in a better place at the moment, thanks to the effort of viewers and listeners. She believes she will be released early in July. We're waiting for more details on that, but it does seem that it's been the pressure of the public that's helped protect her to some extent. Now, at this point, David, I wasn't sure whether you were going to cover a little bit of Brian and Janice Doherty, just perhaps to update people that they are at least safe and well. If you're planning to do that, I've got a little bit of a follow-up to reinforce this question of false reports being made to the media.
Yeah, Brian and Janice are in contact with us now, quite close contact with us now. And their situation, which was extremely grim physically, has improved a great deal as they're now in contact with a lot of friendly people who are able to provide some support and some practical help. So things have improved as they have got to somewhere where we can actually physically help. The situation has improved quite quickly. So they are physically improving. I mean, they were short of food and going without food for prolonged periods and sleeping rough at times, and so that obviously has a fairly major health impact. So that's starting to repair. So we hope that this is the start of the turnaround for Brian and Janice. And there's a lot of people certainly able and willing to help and support them turn their lives around and take the fight for their children to the authorities in a much more practical,
forceful way.
Forceful, yes, and carefully thought out way.
Well, David, that's a bit of good news, but let's with a wry smile on our face have a look at this. Because, of course, last week you mentioned that you had met Brian and Janice. So last week on Friday, we certainly knew that they were not missing. But all of a sudden, on Wednesday, I think it was, a whole flurry of articles appeared in the Londonderry, Donegal area on various local news websites. They all had the same headline. They all had the same text. And it said, appeal issued over missing couple Brian and Janice Doherty. It said PSNI Foyle, that's Police Service Northern Ireland Foyle, are appealing for anyone who has seen or knows the whereabouts of Brian and Janice Doherty, who have been residing in the city. Brian and Janice Doherty were reported as missing to police last Thursday, May the 4th. A PSNI Foyle spokesperson said police have received information that they may be in the Republic of Ireland, close to Letterkenny. If you have any information that may help locate Brian and Janice Doherty, missing since Thursday the 4th of May, please contact PSNI on 101 or Garda Síochána and the number is given. Now, this was very interesting for a number of reasons. David, first of all, because we knew that they weren't missing. And second of all, because every single one of these news outlets had used a copyrighted image which you took of Brian and Janice on the first time you met them. And this was used without permission. And so I approached each of these outlets to ask what they thought they were doing, breaking copyright law in this way. And they all came back saying, oh my goodness, we put this up in good faith. It was sent to us as a press release by Police Service Northern Ireland. And so I have been in contact with Police Service Northern Ireland, and I'm waiting for a proper response from them at the moment to explain why they have used an image which they had no right to use in this appeal that they've issued. And of course, they may just try to justify this by saying, well, it was a missing persons issue, so we chose an image, the best image we could find, which would help people locate Brian and Janice. But the fact is, David, that we had announced our knowledge of where they were, or at least our knowledge that they were safe and well 5 days prior to this press release going out. So to my mind, and correct me if you think I'm wrong here, but to my mind, this can have been nothing other than an attempt by PSNI to intimidate Brian and Janice, to let them know that PSNI is watching them, and I can't see any other explanation for it.
Well, there's no good explanation for it. Let us remember that Brian and Janice Doherty have broken no law ever. They're not wanted for anything. They are law-abiding people. And yet, and this is not the first time this has happened, whenever, they've consistently said they're under surveillance, whenever they get to a position where the authorities do not know their whereabouts, they are reported missing. Reported missing by whom, I wonder? Not by their friends and relatives, because they're not really in contact, or certainly until recently haven't been in contact with friends and relatives. So who's reporting the missing constantly, and why? What's the agenda here? Because if you go on holiday to Ireland, you wouldn't expect within 5 days the Garda to track you down saying, well, you've been reported missing. That wouldn't be your normal expectation. That's not what usually happens when people go on holiday. They're not immediately reported missing, but that happened to the Dohertys. So what's the agenda here? What's actually
David,
David,
I think I can assist a bit here, because I'd like to take our audience today back to a case. We're going back into 1997-98. This was the so-called Bonnie Lewis case, which took place in the Neath Port Talbot area of South Wales. Just very quickly, a bit of background. A little girl becomes very unwell. Bonnie's not her real name, but we're not allowed to use her real name. She becomes very unwell. They take her appendix out. That doesn't cure the problem, but it leaves her with a major abscess. She eventually ends up on a huge cocktail of drugs. There was morphine overprescribed. If the mother had given her the prescribed dose, she would have killed her daughter. And when the mother then starts to try and get a proper diagnosis and treatment, the mother's branded mentally ill. And ultimately, Neath Port Talbot Social Services snatch Bonnie from her mother and the grandfather. We just put a little bit of evidence on screen. This is a remarkable document. This is a discharge note for this little girl from the Royal Free Hampstead Hospital. And if you look at it, there is a prescription, which is the bottom right-hand corner, but there are no details of the girl. There's no details of what the diagnosis for that medication is. This is a disgraceful document, but basically this was one of a number of hospitals that couldn't diagnose what was the matter with a little girl in quite a lot of pain, and she was eventually diagnosed by the mother taking her to the United States, where a specialist hospital correctly diagnosed the little girl as having Zollinger's disease, multiple ulceration of the gut, very painful. But in UK hospitals, this is a tiny selection of medication which was given to the little girl without any diagnosis of what was the matter. Now, where I'm coming to is this, because as the Neath Port Talbot Social Services got involved, the mother was fighting off approaches by social services towards the courts because the little girl was not going to school. She wasn't going to school because she was in pain and too unwell. Mother trying to get a diagnosis, and ultimately the mother took the little girl to America to get that diagnosis. And there, with the big arrow, I've highlighted that while the mother and the daughter and the grandfather were in America, Neath Port Talbot Social Services, led by Julie Resnicek, who was the head of social services at that time, released a missing persons press release, and they obtained a false passport and arranged extradition from the USA on the basis of a false accusation that Mum Linda is suffering from Munchausen by proxy. So here we have the use of a completely fictitious missing persons report that was pushed out in the papers in order to make it look as though the mother had abducted her daughter. This was all fiction, and ultimately the social services used a false passport in order to bring that little girl back to UK. I'm just going to read this very, very quickly. This is a formal statement by a South Wales councillor who did a lot of good work for the family, and he put this in writing: the officers of this council then brought your daughter back to this country as a flight was arranged on the 25th of February 1998, and she was placed in foster care. I have reviewed the events and the expenditure that we occurred as a local authority in sending 2 officers to the United States of America, and I have wholly satisfied that the expenditure was unlawful and ultra vires, and it's quite possible that other expenditure incurred up to the 23rd of March 1998 was also ultra-virus by this authority. However, after that date, the court orders seem to be consistent, but little attention is paid to those happenings in America. I believe we were not entitled to go there. We relied on orders that were invalid, and there is a possibility that we may have misled the courts when those original orders were made. So there is the evidence of this type of action by local authorities, social services, to lie in court, fabricate evidence, fabricate missing person documents in order to retain control of a child. This is how it is done, and I'm just going to add to that. Here, of course, we've got the policeman John Wedger, who was talking about the massive cover-up of the snatching, abuse, trafficking and murder of children. We've got Tim Fortescue calmly saying the Conservative whips used to protect child abusers, and we have no action from the police, no action from the Prime Minister, Theresa May. It's obvious what's going on here, David, and it's clear that the game is to make sure that the state can cover up its tracks on the kidnapping of the Doherty children.
And mental health services is so often the way that the tracks are covered. If I may just read a short email we got in here, this is from someone who has experience of mental health services in Letterkenny, the same team that dealt with the Dohertys. He said, essentially all Emmett Murray does is rubber stamp or give his seal of expert approval to an assessment already conducted by someone else, even if it's just based purely on the speculation of a social worker. He then attends to court to give evidence if required. Luckily, people cannot be detained under the Mental Health Act 2001 for personality disorders, which Tusla seems to be implying in this case and often uses. Paranoid personality disorder, PPD, is the most common diagnosis by the HSE for anyone who accuses them or other state bodies of corruption, because it's very easy to get away with in court. All a doctor has to do is to provoke a patient in some way, and then when the patient accuses them of being abusive, the doctor simply states the patient is paranoid and requires psychotic medication. So you're seeing here another description of the interaction between mental health services and general corruption and children and the state, such that when faced with corruption, as people fight what they clearly see as being things which are wrong and fight for truth and fight for justice, they find ever more branches of the state arrayed against them, and they find the situation gets steadily worse rather than the justice that they seek being provided.
Absolutely correct. And we've got case after case showing that this is exactly what's happening. And I'll just end my part on this by saying that it's quite clear that the so-called independent child abuse inquiry at the moment in the UK does not want to go near this area of saying that the paedophiles are not only in some of the child protection services, clearly it's child abusers running part of those government agencies.
So yesterday we mentioned Tim Farron making his demand for more unaccompanied Syrian children. He turned it into an election issue. I've snipped that section out of the news programme and made it a separate video, which is on my Facebook page. It's on the UK Column Facebook page. I'm going to ask everybody to please share this. We need to make Tim Farron's failure to answer questions for over a year now on this issue, make his failure to prevent child trafficking a major election issue, because of course it's not just Tim Farron, because every senior member of Parliament, whether they've been in this most recent government or in previous governments, has got questions to answer in this area. As we said yesterday, the government has known the Parliament has known since at least 2012 the scale of this, and not just from refugee children coming into the country, but British children as well. This needs to be dealt with. So let's use Tim Farron as the focal point for this. Please share this and get out there, and any prospective member of Parliament that you meet or see in the street, ask them what they're going to do to help protect children in the care system. Now, tomorrow in Nottingham, the Wake Up Project is meeting. That's the 13th of May tomorrow. Starts at 11:30 a.m. And the details, you can freeze that frame and see the address and so on. And just one other reminder that in Dundee University, Dr. Saleha Hassan is speaking tomorrow, also the 13th of May. And of course, she is one of the two major stars, shall we say, of the Panorama's Saving Syria's Children documentary, which we are calling fake news. Saleha Hassan has some questions to answer. If you get onto Robert Stewart's Saving Syria's Children blog and have a look at the evidence that he's presented of the inconsistencies and downright wrongness in that documentary, you can bring some questions to ask Saleha Hassan. And if you do that, please get in touch and let us know how it went.
Excellent. Where does that take us? Brexit, I think.
It takes us to Brexit, David. Brexit will be so damaging to the UK, that the UK will try to rejoin the EU, and that's according to a Scottish minister. Which Scottish minister is talking such nonsense?
This is Mike Russell. This is the brains behind the SNP. This is the finest they have, and it just illustrates how little the social justice warrior type actually understands the world anymore. Right? This is fantasy land. This is how he wishes the world was, not how the world actually is. It does show that they're rather losing touch with reality, I think.
Yes. Okay. Well, let's quickly move on to this. This is NATO Review. Now, of course, NATO Review says that what's published in it does not necessarily represent the official position or policy of member governments or of NATO, but nonetheless, this article here from Dr. Mark Galliotti is arguing that Russian intelligence is at war with the West, a political war. And he's saying it is inevitable and understandable that we rely on mirror imaging when we look at Russia's security and intelligence services. And he goes through a quick description of Russia's intelligence services and how they map onto the types of three-letter services that we're aware of in the West. And he says that whatever individual officers may feel on an institutional level, the intelligence services share Putin's belief that Russia faces a genuine threat from the West. This is existential, not so much in geographic terms, and so on. He says, evidence notwithstanding, the hand of the CIA is seen in risings against pro-Russian authoritarians. And, it's full of language like calling the Russian government a regime and this kind of stuff. He says that the aim is thus to deter the West by being at war with it, or at least to divide, distract, and dismay it to the point that it's unable or unwilling to get in its way. This is the primary goal of the active measures conducted against NATO states by Russian intelligence agencies. Russian intelligence services are the frontline soldiers in Moscow's non-kinetic political war on the West. And so with that in mind, David, Russia apparently, according to the Scotsman, is going to carry out a massive U-turn on its support for Scottish independence.
Russia has hacked our Indy 2 campaign. It's just terrible. There's just nothing these Russians won't stop at. The text in this is really quite funny. It says, Russia's change of heart is likely to be motivated by its desire to weaken Western institutions such as the European Union, which has been dealt a serious blow by Brexit. Green MSP Andy Whiteman, who chairs the group, said, quote, one of the speakers argued that Russia does not have an ideology to export. What it exports is trouble. So there you go. Russia exports trouble. You heard it here. I thought it was oil and gas, but there we go. It's not. It's trouble. And you had that from Green MSP Andy Whiteman. Yeah. So that's quite an endorsement.
Was Putin in that photograph with some members of the SNP?
The photograph was Putin. It wasn't the SNP. No, that's the Politburo. That's not the SNP.
Sorry.
It's an easy mistake to make. I understand how you got that one wrong, but no, that's actually
it was Russian the hats.
Yes, not the SNP.
Okay, well, speaking of trouble, trouble's back on the streets. A few videos floating around the news sites of David Cameron walking around speaking to people. I think the Express gets the headline for the biggest fake news headline, suggesting that somebody was being really outraged at him when in fact it was quite a calm conversation. But anyway, this is what he told the BBC this morning. He said that this is one of the most defining elections, speaking about the general election, that I can remember, where it's so important that the Conservatives win and win well, so that Theresa can negotiate that Brexit deal and stand up to people who want an extreme Brexit, rather either here or in Brussels. Now, of course, in order to understand what he's saying here, we've got to remember this document. I suggest that everybody gets a copy of this document, The Best of Both Worlds, the United Kingdom's special status in a reformed European Union. Now, prior to the referendum, this was a legally binding document. It's no longer a legally binding document because one of the terms within this document is that if there was a referendum held and people voted to leave the European Union, that this would end being legally binding. But nonetheless, read this document and compare it to what Theresa May has said about what her vision is for Brexit, and you'll find that they are the same. Cameron, of course, is coming from the position that he wants to stay within the European Union, Theresa May from the position of Brexit, but the substance is the same, even if the language is different. So Cameron, in his quote this morning, I think has told the truth here for perhaps the first time in his life. Theresa May is going to carry out no Brexit at all. David, any thoughts?
Well, he sounds exactly like Nicola Sturgeon. That's exactly the same language we've been having in Scotland for some months. Extreme Brexit, hard Brexit, the hardest possible Brexit, nasty Brexit. It's very strange that they're trying to pretend all of these words mean something, but they don't mean anything at all. You know, there's no substance to any of this other than as a code, right? And the code is obviously not Brexit.
Not Brexit, absolutely. I would suspect that David Cameron wrote those words in his £25,000 garden shed.
Quite possibly.
Quite possibly. Well, let's have a look there. The Russians are apparently attacking us. Let's have a look at this. This is the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development, which Britain is still fully engaged with. So it's launching its first economic inclusion strategy. It's going to explore opportunities for inclusion, gender. We've been talking about the unicorns, gender, youth, region, workforce, people with disabilities. Trust the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development. It's going to help improve our lives and well-being. So that's the soft EU banking power. Bit more detail on it. They've got a quick 40 million. Some of it's going to be pushed into Transylvania, but they're into energy, they're into green cities, they're working with Taiwan. This is all to do with improving the quality of people's lives, which banks have traditionally done. Yeah. They've looked after people in hospital, housed people, etc. Britain fully involved in this. But what I got interested in was this man. Here he is, Susuma Chakrabarti, president of EBRD. I've just summarised a little bit of his background. He's worked with the British Ministry of Justice. He's worked with the Department for International Development. He was heavily engaged with the Know-How Fund in Central and Eastern Europe. He's also worked for the European Commission, and he's been heavily involved in the Cabinet Office. Good. So what is he, Mike? Is he a politician? Is he a banker? Is he a European? Is he British? We've no idea what he is. He's a banker.
Internationalist.
He's an internationalist banker. Well, if you don't know what the Know-How Fund is, you need to know. You can find this information on the internet. The opening there is the Know-How Fund, a brief history. So we're just bringing a bit of that. The fund was focused upon civil society rather than governments, targeting people, managed jointly by what were the two wings of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, FCO, and the Diplomatic Wing, and the Overseas Development Administration. The fund sought through a broad and diverse range of projects to assist the, quote, transformation of both institutions and working practices, in addition to supporting agriculture. This is banking soft power. What is it designed to do? In this case, to take over the former Soviet states. And if we follow this through, it gets very interesting because it brings us straight back into this man, Michael McCulloch, trustee of Media Action. And this is the very man who boasts that he was working on the BBC's Marshall Plan of the Mind, reframing people's mind in the former Soviet bloc. And I'll just add in this one, what they were doing was looking to change the way people thought in line with the British and to train, quote, independent media. These are very, very dangerous individuals. They're all British and Western European, nothing to do with the Russians, but these people are attacking the Russians.
Any thoughts?
It's sort of like projection, isn't it? I mean, they're busy accusing the Russians of doing precisely what they're doing, precisely what we're doing, precisely what the BBC are doing, and we point the finger at the Russians and say, "Oh, it's terrible."
Yes,
and it doesn't even seem to be particularly true. There's far more evidence that we are doing this to Russia than that they are doing it to the West.
And the beauty of this is, David, that once you know where to look, the evidence is all hidden in daylight. It's there in front of us if we follow the path of these nebulous organisations and these very, very dangerous globalist bankers.
Yes, absolutely. And your wiring diagrams are enormously helpful.
David, let's just very briefly, please, just run through this story of Stephen Sutherland. So body found during search for Stephen Sutherland. This is in Scotland, and the Police Scotland appealed for information on the death of Stephen Sutherland. And this is John O'Groats Journal and Caithness Courier saying that his death is being reinvestigated. This is one of the stories that you're following at the moment. Is that right?
It certainly is. This is one of many stories, actually, from the northeast of Scotland where young men have died under questionable, mysterious, or doubtful circumstances. Now, a couple of things here. There has been no fatal accident inquiry into this. Now, that is the equivalent of a coroner's report in England. But whether one is actually held in Scotland is at the discretion of the Lord Advocate, like so many things in Scotland. It's at the discretion of the Lord Advocate. And so far, the Lord Advocate has decided not to hold any inquiry into this death. And when I asked the Crown Office yesterday, Crown Office Media Department, for comment to confirm that and to explain why, they've refused to answer and have directed me to a Freedom of Information request, which means in 21 days, we may get an answer, we may not. So I've visited the area and made some inquiries, and it's really quite striking what's on the ground, because on the ground, the people in the community have a very clear idea what has happened. They're convinced that Stephen was murdered. The police are putting it down to suicide, having initially tried to put a narrative that it was accidental, but that one really didn't fly. There doesn't seem to be any evidence of suicide other than the fact that the young man is dead. And there seems to be really rather a lot of evidence towards, again, like the Sean Ritchie case, a specific person of interest. In fact, asking around in the local community, you hear the same name again and again as to who that specific person of interest is. The police this is well known to the local police. Yet we don't seem to be having any sort of thorough investigation. No one's very happy in the local community about how this has gone down. So this is an area I just wanted to flag up today that we'll be following. We'll be asking questions about this, and we will be following this case in the weeks and months to come. I think it's a very important case, and we'll talk more about it perhaps next week. We'll be able to outline just what happened in a bit more detail for everybody.
And just to finish on this, is this the same area of Scotland that the Sean Ritchie case is, and obviously the Dochertys as well?
The Sean Ritchie and the Dochertys was the very same area. It was the very same police officers that were involved. That was the Peterhead area. This is further north. This is in Caithness. So that a couple of hours by road actually, further north. But again on that east coast, and again we'll come back to this, but there's a lot of cases in northeast Scotland of young men dying in mysterious circumstances. A lot of them are put down to suicide, and in a lot of cases the families are adamant that it was not suicide.
Okay. David, thanks very much for that update. Somebody in the chat box sort of said this is Stalinist, the way that we're now starting to see the police behave, the use of psychiatry and mental health as a weapon, and indeed it is. And of course, this is not by accident. This is actually coming through into the political system by paid programs. So follow the money is a very good piece of advice. Just to end on the note, I did quite a lot of travelling yesterday, about last 36 hours, 550 odd miles. Part of that was down the M1, which of course is complete roadworks. What is happening there, of course, is smart motorways, although you wouldn't realise that. We were originally going to do some investigation into the fact that our motorway system is being made ready for road charging. It would be wonderful if some of our viewers and listeners could start asking the government and the Transport Minister some questions about who actually voted to start this massive multi-billion investment in order to allow road charging to take place. But we'll end on a smile. I noted several signs which said uneven road surface, and then I realised that actually that was a statement that really the road surface was an utter disgrace and dangerous, but it was much better to label it uneven and reduce the traffic speed. So there we are. If anybody can excuse me, help on the subject of this road charging and the massive expenditure on our motorways, who authorised it, when was it debated in Westminster, and what's the ultimate goal, we would be extremely pleased. That's it for today. Thanks for joining us. We will be back same time on Monday. Bye-bye.